We performed in 72 shows. Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour editing was subject to stringent CBS regulations. Every second was examined. Every phrase was examined. However, something snuck through on September 17, 1967. It was missed by the censors. The director failed to notice. It was only later that even the brothers found out. The camera unintentionally caught something in the backdrop during the Who's performance, which confirmed what everyone had assumed but was unable to confirm. There was sorrow at the start of the Smothers Brothers saga. Major Thomas B. Smothers Jr., their father, served in the army. He served in the Philippines during World War II in 1941. His wife Ruth and their sons were deported when Japan attacked. Major Smothers was taken into custody. He made it via the horrific death march in Bataan. He was thereafter transferred to Japan's brutal Fukuoka No. 22 prison camp. He was too ill to work in April 1945, near the end of the war. He was sent from Fukuoka to Korea on April 25. He didn't make it. He was buried at sea, according to some reports. According to some, he was cremated in Korea. Only 36 of the 110 men he transferred with survived. The final person to pass away was Major Smothers. Ruth was left to raise Dick, born in 1938, and Tom, born in 1937, by herself. Their mother put in a lot of overtime while they were growing up in California. Their comedy was influenced by their difficult lives for years to come. In 1959, that humor gained popularity at the Purple Onion, San Francisco, at a little club. Despite just having a 2-week booking, the brothers stayed for 36 weeks because they were so popular. Their peculiar blend of humorous tales and folk music was adored by the audience. A flamenco dancer was heard one evening. She had to be replaced by Tom and Dick. Everyone was reminded of their uniqueness by that unexpected presence. They made $2,000 a week by the end of their stint. They had been earning $2 per night just a few months prior. The Smothers Brothers at the Purple Onion, their debut album, came out in 1961. Their career was launched by it. They performed in a band that Tom founded while still in college, long before the Purple Onion. The group was known as the Casual Quintet. Tom was a guitarist. In order to join him, Dick learned to play the bass. One by one, the other members departed. Dick and Tom, however, continued. To pass the time in between songs, they began cracking jokes. Their style really started at that point. They found that listeners enjoyed the music just as much as they enjoyed their brotherly taunting. Their trademark was that sibling teasing. Tom pretended to be the innocent one on stage. Dick portrayed the somber sibling. They quarreled and fought in front of the audience. "Mom always liked you best," Tom would add. The crowd would roar as well. It was real. They were simply who they were. Their comedy had an honesty that people could relate to because of that real-life feeling. They had the opportunity to grow even more by the middle of the 1960s. On Sunday nights, CBS was losing hard against NBC's Bonanza. A quarter of all TV viewers in America were watching Bonanza. It had already destroyed The Gary Moore Show and Perry Mason, 2 other CBS hits. CBS made the decision to take a risk. Their goal was to attract a younger audience. It was their hope that the Smothers Brothers would succeed. Dick and Tom were distinct, intelligent, and humorous. CBS wanted to restore the network's reputation. On February 5, 1967, the Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour made its debut. It appeared to be a typical variety program at first glance. They were presented by Ed Sullivan as normal American children. However, after a few episodes, everyone realized they were anything but normal. They made jokes about the war in Vietnam. They made fun of politicians. They discussed actual problems. Their humor was bold and incisive. They pushed boundaries once a week. And it was adored. They overtook Bonanza in the ratings in just 2 weeks. Younger viewers paid attention. Advertisers were ecstatic. Before they began, Tom had requested complete creative autonomy. CBS consented since they were in dire need of a hit. The brothers were free to say whatever they pleased because of their agreement. Folk singers like Pete Seeger, who performed songs against war, were invited. President Johnson was ridiculed on national television. Every performance was unexpected. Every performance seemed risky. They were often thwarted by CBS censors. The brothers retaliated, frequently including the censorship into the performance. Like the hosts, the writing team was bold. There, up-and-coming comedians like David Steinberg, Lorne Michaels, Rob Reiner, and Steve Martin all began their careers. They penned meaningful jokes. They violated the standard TV regulations. Many went on to permanently alter comedy in America. The Mary Tyler Moore Show, All in the Family, and Saturday Night Live were all influenced by their work. Something unexpected occurred on American television in 1968. The Beatles' Hey Jude promotional video was aired on the Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour on October 6. People in the UK had previously seen it on September 8, a few weeks prior. However, this was the first time such a film was available to Americans. They weren't referred to as music videos back then. They were referred to as promotional movies. On September 4, the Beatles filmed Hey Jude at Twickenham Studios. Even the set was designed by Paul McCartney. A large orchestra performed in white tuxedos. Additionally, 300 extras joined in on the final song. Ringo Starr has recently returned to the Beatles after a brief hiatus. Thus, this was not merely a song. For them, it was a significant occasion. And it wasn't all. The Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour demonstrated revolution the following week. Back-to-back Beatles videos offered viewers in America a fresh perspective on the group. Even the Ed Sullivan program was unable to accomplish this. No one else had access save the Smothers Brothers. It seemed like a significant change. The music was evolving. Even television was evolving. Another significant event occurred on the same show in 1967. They asked Pete Seeger to sing. Seeger had been prohibited from television for years. He had been off the radio for almost 17 years due to the blacklist. He made a clear reference to President Johnson's Vietnam policy when he sang Waist Deep in the Big Muddy. The song was cut by CBS before to its September 1967 airing. Tom Smothers had no intention of being silent. He ensured the press got the story. Seeger's return was permitted by CBS due to public outrage. Millions of people finally witnessed him perform the song uncensored on February 25, 1968. For the first time, a blacklisted musician publicly criticized a president. It was a potent moment that demonstrated the ability of protest music to transcend boundaries. Additionally, bands that no one else would touch were given a platform by the Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour. Steppenwolf, Buffalo Springfield, Jefferson Airplane, The Who, and The Doors all played between 1967 and 1969. These weren't suitable options for popular television. The Who detonated explosives in Keith Moon's drum setup and smashed their instruments to close one performance. In addition to sending shrapnel flying, the roar hurt Pete Townshend's hearing. The Doors used a full orchestra to play Touch Me. Crown of Creation, a song on the fear of nuclear war, was performed by Jefferson Airplane. Steppenwolf's Born to be Wild and Buffalo Springfield's For What It's Worth delivered unadulterated energy into American households. Whether it frightened the network didn't matter to the Smothers Brothers. Their goal was to provide a forum for these dissident voices. Some of the biggest names in rock were impressed by that spirit. Jimi Hendrix stopped before a song on April 26, 1969, at the Los Angeles Forum, and dedicated his performance to the Smothers Brothers. He praised them as heroes for letting protest and art coexist on television. Hendrix's career was at its peak. CBS recently canceled the show because it was too contentious. Hendrix, however, remembered. He made it clear to everyone on that stage that the Smothers Brothers were important. Comedy and music had never been so well matched. They also used comedy in their actions. The recurrent segment Share a Little Tea with Goldie served as the ideal illustration. Goldie O'Keefe, portrayed by Lee French, was a disoriented hippie who offered humorous counsel that was laced with ambiguity. Tea was code for marijuana. Goldie's first name was Goldie Keefe, which is slang for cannabis. The majority of viewers at home were aware of what was happening, but the censors forced them to alter it. When Goldie said roaches, no one assumed she was referring to bugs. Because it seemed like the show was winking at them, younger viewers really enjoyed the joke. Goldie became a cult favorite despite the network's monitoring. Holding back was never Keith Moon's style. He made the decision to go much farther than normal on September 17, 1967, when The Who performed on the Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour. Moon had a surprise in store for the band, who were there to perform My Generation. He had smuggled explosives into his kick drum. Much more than anyone had consented to. Not even his fellow musicians knew what was going to happen. Moon desired a dramatic, memorable, and boisterous climax. The explosives detonated with a loud bang as the song's final note struck. Debris and smoke flew across the stage. A fragment of a cymbal struck Moon, causing him to fall backward. Pete Townshend had a huge mess of blown-up hair. Townshend would suffer from hearing loss for the rest of his life as a result of the force's extreme strength. The crowd was startled into silence by the loud boom before they began to cheer and scream. As intended, Moon had wreaked havoc and spectacle. However, the cost was high. In one ear, Townshend would lose about 90% of his hearing. The ringing that ensued was excruciating and never truly subsided. Townshend continued to talk about the ongoing anguish and how the damage made it more difficult to play the guitar years later. Everyone will never forget it, and it permanently altered the way they performed. The guitar then appeared. Townshend snatched up Tom Smothers' acoustic guitar and shattered it on stage amid the chaos and smoke. Too astonished to speak, Smothers simply stared at him. It seemed like the ideal way to put a stop to the mayhem, a boisterous outburst that revealed the true identities of everyone. They were pushing limits that no one had before dared to cross. The destroyed instrument and the explosion did more than just garner media attention. It was incorporated into rock history. Younger admirers adored it. The elderly were furious. America had received something genuine, unvarnished, and rebellious from the show. Children believed it to be freedom, but parents detested it. There was a real generational divide. And that was precisely what the Smothers Brothers, The Who, and their dissident mob want. No one would ever forget the performance. Joan Baez was agitating things as well. Everyone knew that she was a folk singer who advocated for social justice and peace. She was born in Staten Island, New York, on January 9, 1941, and had dedicated her life to advocating for issues that she supported. Baez's music resonated with those who desired change, and she had previously been imprisoned for demonstrating by 1967. She wanted to dedicate a song to her husband, David Harris, who was facing a 3-year prison sentence, when she made an appearance on the Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour. He had opposed the Vietnam War and refused to be drafted. Baez expressed her pride in him at the show, but CBS largely omitted her words, leaving only a hazy statement before she started singing. Among the many indications that CBS was under pressure was Baez's edited dedication. The network was afraid of angering sponsors and the government. President Lyndon B. Johnson himself had voiced his displeasure with the program. Johnson had been up till 3 in the morning to demand that CBS take control of the Smothers Brothers over the phone. Nixon trailed behind, making even more efforts to remove them from the air. Harry Belafonte had been booked for the show in 1968. They produced an impressive performance. Belafonte performed a song, "Don't Halt the Carnival, Lord." On video, however, anti-war demonstrators were beaten by police during the Democratic National Convention in Chicago. It was audacious. It was authentic. However, CBS canceled the entire piece before it was broadcast. And it didn't stop there. After that, CBS sold the Republican Party the 5 minutes they had trimmed for their campaign commercials. What started out as a sincere protest against political violence became an advertisement for the politicians who were the target of the demonstration. Which side the network was on was obvious. The Smothers Brothers were under a lot of strain by the end of 1968. Long before they were to air, CBS had mandated that all scripts, jokes, song lyrics, and even entire videotapes be submitted for inspection. It was more than a casual check. Every word would be scrutinized by censors. They searched for political items. Anything pertaining to religion, the Vietnam War, or even lighthearted humor. Every little element had to meet their exacting requirements. Some guest performers who had a more edgy sense of humor were also frequently edited or eliminated entirely. 10 days before to each exhibition, the deadline was established. At the time, it was a strict requirement designed to curb the brothers' tendency to push boundaries. The authors felt confined in a never-ending loop of waiting, revising, and resubmitting. Changes were frequently requested at the last minute by CBS, sometimes even hours before the show went live. It felt like death by 1,000 cuts, as the writers would say, and they were not mistaken. Tom and Dick made the decision to fight back one day. In their comedy, Tom took on the role of a censor, using enormous scissors to tear up screenplays and interrupting actors in the middle of sentences. The humor was obvious. They were silencing their show. It was a daring punchline. Complete quiet was all that was visible on the screen. CBS, however, failed to find the humor. The sketch was not broadcast by the network. According to internal memos, CBS believed the comedy would be too detrimental to their reputation. A similar sketch featuring Elaine May was also removed. Her last statement was, "We're just playing you with meaningless jokes if we're not allowed to say anything important." Slice deeply. Tom was enraged. At this point, the censorship was so severe that it was illegal to mock it. The brothers, meantime, were not giving up. Over deadlines, they agreed to play a game with CBS. Tapes would be sent as late as they could. Occasionally, they supplied a safe version for inspection and then made last-minute changes before airing. CBS went bananas over it. They were accused of breaching their contract by the network. CBS ultimately made the decision that enough was enough in April 1969. They asserted that the Smothers Brothers had not timely submitted a tape, despite the fact that there was proof that CBS was partially responsible for the delays. The show, which was still among the top 10 most watched shows in the US, was cancelled for all the reasons listed. Deadlines had little to do with the actual conflict. It has to do with control. Later, Tom Smothers would claim that it was all a part of a scheme to silence them. The altercation leaked into the media. The Smothers Brothers were being held captive by CBS, according to a scathing editorial in the New York Times. Support from the public increased. CBS was inundated with protests and letters. Both musicians and politicians voiced their opinions. All of a sudden, this was about more than one show. Free expression on national television was at issue. CBS management were alarmed by the editorial. They hurried into meetings for damage control. The Smothers Brothers were adamant about speaking their minds and refused to back down. Tom said it plainly. "They're not merely ending our show. They are attempting to suppress the truth." The history of television changed as a result of that stand. However, CBS also had other issues. Large sponsors such as Procter & Gamble and Ford began to remove their advertisements. Because of the show's political and anti-war gags, businesses were afraid of offending their audience. The losses quickly mounted. CBS lost millions of dollars in a matter of months. According to internal memos, one of the main causes of the cancellation was sponsor pressure. If advertisers were put off, even a highly regarded program might be sacrificed. "We won the lawsuit, but we lost the culture war," Tom thought bitterly afterwards. Advertisers had warned that if you spoke too freely, you would be punished. There was one joke that went too far. In March 1969, Dick made a brief, incisive, and accurate imitation of President Nixon when he joked, "I will end the Vietnam War as soon as I can find where the off button is." However, it terrified advertisers and infuriated CBS. Both the new president and the Vietnam War were raw nerves. This drove them to the brink of the already tight network. CBS shut it off on April 4, 1969. It was immediately cancelled. Everyone knew it was truly about their politics, but CBS said they didn't turn in footage on time. Another season of the show was planned. Only a few weeks prior, the brothers had been renewed. CBS even cancelled a previously recorded broadcast in which comedian David Steinberg made yet another anti-war statement. In America, the program was never broadcast. Instead, it was televised in Canada. The cancellation came suddenly and brutally. It served as a warning to all other performers that going too far out of line may have dire repercussions. In court, the Smothers Brothers retaliated. They fought for 4 years after suing CBS for breach of contract. They prevailed in April 1973. In today's currency, the judge gave them $776,300, which is more than $5.5 million. It was a landmark decision. It established a rule prohibiting networks from using censorship as a pretext to cancel shows. The victory was bittersweet, though. Their platform was already gone. The charm of their comedic hour was never fully replicated in subsequent endeavors. They eventually produced a more subdued show on NBC, but it was a failure. Finding a successor didn't take CBS long. They debuted the wholesome rural comedy program Hee Haw, complete with country tunes and cheesy gags, on June 15, 1969. Politics, satire, and controversy were all absent. That was precisely what CBS desired. There were 23 seasons of it. Its performance demonstrated that networks would always opt for safe entertainment over danger. Dick and Tom were also affected by the altercation. Tom was the most affected. Years later, he said that he felt empty after losing the show. It took a long time to heal and broke his confidence. Car racing was one of Dick's new hobbies, and creating wine as a coping mechanism. Both brothers were irrevocably altered. They carried the scars with them. The Smothers Brothers made another attempt a year after CBS dismissed them in 1969. They brought their humor to ABC this time. The atmosphere had shifted by the summer of 1970. ABC used caution. The network does not want to experience any problems similar to those CBS encountered. They advised the brothers to calm down and closely monitored them. Rebellious humor has lost its appeal to audiences. People had moved on and the Vietnam War was coming to an end. The performance ended. ABC opted not to offer them a fall slot after ratings declined. This brief period demonstrated how quickly public preferences may shift. They were state-of-the-art 1 year. The following day, they had already fallen behind. They made another attempt in January 1975, this time on NBC. The first episode was really popular. With a 50 share, it was America's fifth most watched show. Their success was short-lived, however it is now difficult to achieve that kind of number. Tension existed behind the scenes. Tom and Dick were at odds with Joe Hamilton, the producer. Tom could not even perform retakes without losing some of his earnings. They were not permitted to openly speak with the press or interact with writers. The show quickly dropped to the bottom of the ratings. Frustrated, Hamilton walked out. For the final 4 episodes, Tom was ultimately given power by NBC. They did some of their most audacious work at that period, including a joke about cocaine, which was uncommon for primetime at the time, and featured well-known guests like George Carlin and Ringo Starr. Midway through the season, NBC decided to terminate the show despite these positive aspects. It served as a reminder that even a promising return could be ruined by networks. In 1988, an unexpected event occurred. The Smothers Brothers were invited to return for a 1-hour reunion program on CBS, over 2 decades after they were fired. They even dubbed it the 20th reunion of the Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour. 3 primetime Emmys were nominated for the special. Authors like Bob Einstein and Steve Martin also made a comeback. It was a soft, sentimental show. The ratings were decent, but it felt quite secure. The political fervor had vanished. Critics and audiences enjoyed seeing them again, but it was no longer groundbreaking. In the same year, CBS revived their program in its entirety. It was odd timing. There was a strike by the Writers Guild. The brothers fell back on their old habits in the absence of authors. The comedy was mostly done by the guests. They had new scripts once more when the strike ended. The ratings slightly increased. Even though the show received 5 Emmy nominations, television has already advanced. The 2 seasons of the revival ran from March 1988 to August 1989. It never made as much of an impression as the original. In the fall of 2022, the brothers' narrative was permanently saved. Their complete archive was accepted into the Performing Arts Collection at UC Santa Barbara. Contracts, court documents, photographs, music sheets, and recordings were all included. According to curator David Suber, it should be placed next to the Library of Congress. Its struggle for free expression and its impact on comedy are demonstrated in this compilation. Their work is being researched decades later. It demonstrates how comedy can oppose authority and advocate for substantive change. That was the real legacy of the Smothers Brothers. They were pushing the envelope even before Saturday Night Live was a thing. From 1967 until 1969, their show was in operation. It joked about politicians, censorship, and war. They taught writers like Lorne Michaels, who would go on to develop Saturday Night Live. Comedians like Samantha Bee, John Oliver, Stephen Colbert, and Jon Stewart later took that route. The Smothers Brothers demonstrated how comedy could provoke thought and speak truth to power. Additionally, the show served as a springboard for major comic stars. One of the early authors was Steve Martin. George Carlin and Rob Reiner were also regulars. Many of them later claimed that this show was responsible for their beginning. The brothers had established a risk-taking environment that was safe. That added a fresh, keen edge to American humor. That persisted for many years. They retaliated when CBS canceled them in 1969. CBS canceled their show due to censoring, despite the fact that it had one of the greatest ratings. They were taken to court by the brothers. They prevailed. It was a historic case for television free speech. A comedy show had effectively retaliated against a network for the first time. It established a precedent for the importance of creative freedom. And they accomplished all of this during a time when civil rights, Vietnam, and culture in general caused division in America. A bridge was the Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour. Simon and Garfunkel, Jefferson Airplane, and The Who were among the guests they invited. Pete Seeger, a folk musician, was banned because of his anti-war song. Additionally, they played brand new videos, such as Hey Jude by the Beatles. This was the first time that many people had ever heard of the counterculture. It was once succinctly put by Bill Maher. The brothers had no qualms about upsetting those who didn't agree with them. They had no intention of pleasing everyone. They demonstrated that humor could make a statement and have an impact. That lesson persisted even after the show was canceled. And it is still important today.